Welcome to Life Stories. In life, we often face moments where we're underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked. But sometimes, it's in those very moments that we find the strength to rise above and prove our worth. This is the story of Sarah, a woman who was told she could never succeed, simply because of her role as a homemaker. What seemed like an impossible journey became a powerful testament to perseverance and the courage to challenge the status quo. Subscribe to the channel to start today's story and discover how Sarah turned rejection into triumph. Life stories like this are worth sharing. The sterile, white-walled bank office was suffocating. The air seemed thicker than usual as I sat across from Mark, my brother-in-law, clutching my leather portfolio with my meticulously prepared business proposal. I watched him shuffle through the pages, not even bothering to look up at me. The soft click of his Mont Blanc pen echoed through the silence, a nervous habit I had seen countless times at family dinners. It was as if the more he clicked that pen, the more distance he could put between himself and the reality I was trying to show him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was a moment I had prepared for years. For the past decade, I had managed our household finances with a skill and precision that would rival any professional. Yet here I was, still being dismissed. Still being told that my work didn't matter simply because I didn't fit the traditional mold of success. My name is Sarah, and I was about to learn just how little my family valued my worth, especially when it came to something as simple as a business proposal. Mark finally looked up, offering me a smile that I had come to despise, one that felt condescending, as though he was humoring me with my little project. He set the portfolio down in front of him with a sharp snap. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the judgment in his eyes, even before the words left his mouth. Sarah, I understand you're trying to be productive, but without a formal income or employment history, there's really nothing I can do here, he said. His voice casual but dismissive. It was the same tone he had used countless times before, at family gatherings where I was relegated to the background, quietly managing the household while everyone else discussed real business. My fingers tightened around the edge of the portfolio as I fought to keep my voice steady. I've been managing our household finances for 10 years. I countered, my words deliberate, controlled. The proposal shows clear revenue projections, and running a household budget isn't the same as running a business. Before I could continue, he cut me off, waving his hand as though my words were insignificant. It's not the same thing, Sarah. A budget isn't the same as scaling a business. Come back when you have a real job. The sting of his words hit harder than I cared to admit. I could feel my cheeks flush with anger, but I held it in, the years of his condescending remarks playing in my mind like a looping soundtrack. My hands trembled as I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my dress as I did so. Thank you for your time, I managed to say, keeping my voice calm despite the emotional storm swirling inside me. I walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing in the marble lobby, each one feeling like a small victory. The moment I reached the door, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rebecca, my closest friend and business partner. Meeting with Zachary confirmed for 3 p.m. You ready to change the game? I couldn't help but smile as I read the message. More than ready, I typed back. Mark just did exactly what we expected. I stepped out into the fresh air, relief flooding me as I walked toward my car. As I climbed in, I hit the speakerphone and dialed Rebecca. The phone rang only once before she picked up. You won't believe how dismissive he was, I said, the anger from the meeting now shifting to determination. What a jerk. Rebecca's voice crackled through the line. But it makes our plan even sweeter. The app's final numbers came in. We're looking at a 300% growth rate since launch. And Mark has no idea that his bank is about to partner with us. I laughed, the sting of rejection slowly fading. That's right, I thought. His sister-in-law is the silent partner he's been hearing about. You should have seen Zachary's face when he realized who you were, Rebecca added. He couldn't believe it. Dylan's own sister-in-law is behind Tech Mom. Speaking of which, I said, feeling a sense of pride bubbling up. Elliot's still okay with keeping quiet about this. Right, he understands. I replied. My husband's unwavering support grounding me. He knows his brother needs this wake-up call. 15 years of snide comments about my little homemaker routine are about to blow up in his face. The best part is, he did this to himself. Rebecca chuckled. If he'd actually read your proposal, he would have recognized our platform. But he couldn't see past his own prejudice. I nodded as I pulled out of the parking lot. Exactly. He assumed that just because I don't wear a suit every day, I must be insignificant. But it's time he learned that success doesn't always wear a tie. The conversation shifted to the details of our next move. The partnership announcement was on the horizon, and I could feel the tension building. Everything we had worked for, everything I had built while being underestimated and dismissed, was about to come to light. In just a few short days, Mark would learn that the quiet housewife he had so easily dismissed was about to change everything. But for now, I focused on the present. I was about to take a big step toward proving to Mark, and to everyone, that success isn't about appearances, it's about perseverance, belief, and the strength to rise above the judgments of others. The next phase of our plan was set, and nothing was going to stop me. The weeks that followed were a blur of excitement and quiet anticipation. While Mark continued to scoff at the idea that someone like me could possibly succeed in the world of business, I was busy watching the numbers rise, watching my dream grow into something undeniable. Tech Mom, the app I had co-founded with Rebecca, was beginning to make waves. With every new user, with every new partnership, I felt more validated. But there was also a sense of quiet, simmering satisfaction. For the first time, I wasn't just Sarah, the housewife to the people around me. I was Sarah, the businesswoman, the entrepreneur. The app wasn't just a success, it was thriving. When Rebecca and I first discussed the idea, we were two moms, frustrated by the lack of simple, intuitive solutions for managing our busy lives. Coordinating school schedules, keeping track of appointments, handling family tasks, all of it seemed like such a mess. We laughed about it at first, joking that if we could find a way to solve these problems, it might just be worth something. But what started as a conversation at a coffee shop had turned into something much more, something that now had over 2 million active users. And there was Mark, still entrenched in his belief that home-based businesses were nothing more than hobbies. He continued to dismiss me, not realizing that his own bank was about to partner with our company. It wasn't just the business success that kept me going. It was the satisfaction of knowing that the people who had underestimated me were about to get a rude awakening. Mark, in particular, had no idea what was coming for him. I could already picture his face when the news hit. How would he react when he realized that the business he had so carelessly dismissed was going to be his bank's next big partnership? I couldn't wait. But for now, I focused on preparing for the announcement dinner, the event that would mark the culmination of everything I had worked for. It was going to be a delicate balance, exposing Mark's prejudice without completely destroying the fragile family dynamic we had. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about proving something to myself, about showing that I was more than what they had always thought of me. Rebecca and I were in constant contact, making sure everything was on track for the announcement. We went over the final details, ensuring that the numbers were perfect, making sure the press release was ready to go, and finalizing the partnership agreement with Zachary. He had been more than supportive, even when the rest of my family seemed to doubt my abilities. Zachary was a true ally, and I had come to rely on him in ways I hadn't anticipated. When I wasn't working on Tech Mom, I was home with Elliot, my husband, who had always been my rock. He had watched me struggle with feelings of inadequacy for years, but he never once doubted my abilities. "You've got this," he'd tell me whenever I started second-guessing myself. I needed those words. Needed to feel like someone truly saw me for who I was, not just as Mark's sister-in-law or a homemaker, but as a force to be reckoned with. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all pressed down on me. Despite the success, despite the growing recognition, I was still Sarah, the quiet, underestimated wife. At family gatherings, I would hear Mark and others discussing real business, and I'd feel that familiar pang of discomfort. The old insecurities crept in, whispering that maybe I didn't belong at the table, that my success was somehow invalid compared to theirs. But I refused to let those feelings define me anymore. And then, the text came. Meeting with Zachary confirmed for 3 p.m. You ready? I smiled at Rebecca's message, feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through me. It was time. Time to show Mark and everyone else that Tech Mom was more than just a side project. We weren't just a small app with a niche audience. We were a company poised for something bigger. It was time for them to see the growth, to see the impact we had made, and more importantly, to see who I really was. As the days ticked by, I prepared myself for the dinner. I knew it would be a spectacle, one that I wasn't going to miss. It wasn't about revenge. No. It was about recognition. It was about showing Mark and the others that what I had built was more than just a small hobby. This was real. This was my work, my achievement. And no one could take that away from me. I was about to change everything. And Mark had no idea. The evening arrived. And with it, a knot of nervous excitement tightened in my stomach. The dinner was set. The stage was ready. And Mark had no idea what was coming. It felt surreal. Like the calm before the storm. My plan, which had been simmering for weeks, was finally about to come to fruition. I had put everything into Tech Mom. Not just for the business, but for my own sense of worth. I needed this moment, not for revenge, but for the closure it would bring. It was time for Mark to see the reality of what I had built. And more importantly, for the rest of my family to understand the magnitude of what I had accomplished. As I stepped into the grand dining room of my mother's house, the same room where family gatherings had always been held, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. I had been here so many times, always on the periphery of conversations, listening to discussions about real businesses and real accomplishments. But tonight would be different. Tonight, I was about to make my mark, not as the quiet, underestimated homemaker, but as Sarah, the successful entrepreneur. Mark stood at the front of the room, confidently holding court with the other guests, explaining to anyone who would listen how he had discovered a groundbreaking new business opportunity. His voice was full of that same self-assurance, the tone of someone who truly believed that he was the key to any success. I couldn't help but watch him with a quiet sense of irony. He had no idea that the company he was so excited about partnering with was mine. The company he had dismissed, rejected, and belittled was now the one his own bank was about to proudly announce as their partner. I took my seat at the far end of the table, just as planned, watching the scene unfold. My mother was sitting next to Mark, smiling that proud, supportive smile she always wore when he talked about his business ventures. Across from me, Elliot sat quietly, his hand resting casually on the table, the only person who truly understood the weight of the moment. The room buzzed with conversation, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension that only I could feel. Mark was oblivious, spinning his tale of business acumen, while I sat silently, preparing for the moment that would change everything. Finally, the moment arrived. Mark stood up, glass in hand, ready to make his announcement. His voice boomed across the room as he began to speak about the partnership his bank was about to enter. I could feel the moment building, the weight of anticipation thickening the air. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark began, his confidence filling the room. It's my great pleasure to announce that my bank is about to partner with an incredibly innovative tech company. This is a company that has truly proven itself. And I believe with the right guidance, it has the potential to go far. We're talking about a company that's not just about technology, but about changing the way we think about business. I almost couldn't contain the laughter that bubbled up inside of me. Mark was talking about my company. The company he had dismissed so easily. the one he never thought was worth his time. He was about to take credit for discovering something he had never even bothered to understand. Before he could go any further, I stood up, my laptop already in my hands. The room went silent as I connected it to the projector. The first slide appeared on the wall, my original loan application. The one Mark had rejected without a second thought. His dismissive comment, "Typical housewife with delusions of entrepreneurship," was highlighted in bold. "I think it's time we hear the real story," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the silence. Mark's confident smile faltered, and I could see the confusion flicker across his face as the room turned toward me. "This," I continued, "is the loan application you rejected. The same one you didn't even bother reading past the first page. I think it's important for everyone to understand what happened here." The room was dead silent. Mark stood frozen, the color draining from his face as his own words came back to haunt him. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I clicked to the next slide, revealing the internal memo Mark had written about me. The words, "Typical housewife with delusions of entrepreneurship," were there again, and the shock in the room was palpable. One of the guests gasped, and I heard whispers begin to spread like wildfire. My mother's eyes widened, and she looked between Mark and me, clearly struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't how she had imagined the evening going. I clicked to the next slide, and now the room was filled with murmurs of disbelief. The metrics from Tech Mom were up on the screen: 3 million active users, millions in revenue, and projections that had the potential to change the industry. The success I had built was there, in black and white. "You see, Mark," I said, my voice steady, "while you were busy dismissing my little home project, this is what it grew into." Mark's face was now a mixture of confusion, anger, and humiliation. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You're lying." "No, Mark," I replied calmly. "This is real. This is what happens when you take the time to actually read the proposals in front of you, instead of assuming you know better." As the room fell into stunned silence, I clicked to the final slide, the press release announcing our partnership. The entire room had now turned toward me, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces. Mark had no idea what he had just walked into. The company he had so easily dismissed was now his bank's next big opportunity. And the founder was standing right in front of him. "Let's talk about business," I said, feeling a calm satisfaction wash over me. "But let's also talk about what happens when you underestimate people. Mark, you've spent years dismissing people like me. I think it's time you learned a valuable lesson about who's really been doing the work here." The room was silent as the weight of my words sank in. Mark had no response. He couldn't. The damage was done. And now it was time for him to face the consequences of his own arrogance. And as the silence hung in the air, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. The truth had finally come to light. The silence that followed the revelation felt deafening. Mark stood frozen, as though the world had suddenly shifted under his feet. His usual self-assurance had vanished, replaced by something I had never seen in him before: humiliation. For the first time, I could see the cracks in his carefully crafted persona. The man who had prided himself on being the epitome of success, the one who thought he could never be wrong, was now forced to confront the undeniable truth. As the room remained eerily quiet, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. My mother sat in stunned silence, unable to look at either of us. The rest of the guests exchanged whispered remarks, their faces a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. The air in the room felt thick, as though it were charged with tension. I knew that no matter how this played out, things would never be the same again. Mark's attempt to regain his composure was painful to watch. He straightened up, cleared his throat, and took a step forward. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, his usual confidence replaced by a note of desperation. This isn't right," he said, his gaze flickering between me and the others. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Sarah," This dinner is supposed to be about celebrating a business partnership, not airing personal grievances. I could see the anger in his eyes, the flicker of frustration. He didn't want to admit that he had been wrong. He didn't want to acknowledge the fact that his assumptions had cost him not only a business opportunity, but also his credibility. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. No, Mark. What's embarrassing is that you dismissed a real business opportunity because of your own biases. You didn't take the time to read my proposal. And now you're standing here pretending to be the one who discovered it. This isn't just about me, it's about all the women you've dismissed over the years. All the businesses you've rejected because they didn't fit your narrow idea of success. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Mark to respond. But he didn't. He couldn't. For once, he was at a loss for words. I glanced over at Elliot, who had been silently watching the entire exchange. He gave me a small nod, a gesture of quiet support. His calm presence grounded me. And I knew that this moment wasn't just for me, it was for all the women who had been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed by people like Mark. This was bigger than just proving a point to him. It was about making sure that no one else would have to endure the same treatment that I had. The tension in the room broke when Zachary, who had been quietly observing the entire scene, finally spoke up. I think we've heard enough from Mark, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. It's time for him to understand the consequences of his actions. Mark turned towards Zachary, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and defiance. What are you talking about? You can't just. I'm talking about the fact that your actions have cost the bank millions in lost opportunities. Zachary interrupted. And you've done it time and time again. Dismissing businesses led by women without even bothering to read the proposals. The board is aware of your bias, Mark. They've already made their decision. I felt a chill run down my spine as Zachary's words sunk in. The board knew. They knew what Mark had been doing for years. They knew how he had turned down countless opportunities based on his personal biases. And now they were going to hold him accountable. Mark looked around the room, his face a mask of disbelief. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who called the shots. And now, all of that was slipping through his fingers. This isn't fair, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I've worked hard for everything I have. I've built a career, a reputation, and you've done it by stepping on people along the way. I replied, my voice steady. You've made a career out of judging others without understanding them. And now, it's time for you to see the consequences of that. The room was silent again. And for a moment, I felt the weight of everything I had worked for. The pain of being dismissed. The years of feeling invisible. All of it had led to this moment. I wasn't just proving something to Mark. I was proving it to myself. I was showing myself, and everyone else, that I was more than just a homemaker. I was capable of building something meaningful. Something real. Mark, I said, my voice softening slightly. This isn't about making you feel small. It's about making you see what you've been missing. Maybe, just maybe, this will be the wake-up call you need. Mark looked at me for a long moment. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. I didn't expect him to change overnight. But this was a start. It was a start to recognizing that success doesn't always come in the form of a suit and tie. And it doesn't always look like what we expect it to. Sometimes, success is quieter. Sometimes, it's the things that are overlooked, the people who are underestimated, that end up making the biggest impact. As the dinner continued, I could feel the weight of the moment slowly lifting. I had said what needed to be said. I had exposed the truth. And now it was out there for everyone to see. Mark might never fully understand the lesson, but at least he had heard it. And for me, that was enough. The evening ended with the usual pleasantries. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the air. My family, my friends, And even the people who had been skeptical of me before, now saw me in a different light. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The journey wasn't over. But tonight, I had won. And I had done it on my own terms. As the evening came to a close, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The road hadn't been easy. And there were times I had doubted myself. But tonight was a turning point. Mark's harsh dismissal of my work, once a source of deep hurt, had now become the catalyst for a change I hadn't anticipated. I had not only proved him wrong, but I had also shown myself what I was capable of. While the room slowly returned to its usual buzz, a newfound respect for me seemed to hang in the air. Mark, now visibly humbled, quietly stepped back into the shadows, and I found a sense of peace that I had long been searching for. This wasn't just a victory over him, it was a victory for all the women whose potential had been ignored, dismissed, or belittled. The journey ahead would be filled with more challenges, more obstacles. But for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. With my head held high, and my heart full of the strength I had found in the quietest of moments. As I walked out of the house that evening, I knew I had not only changed the narrative of my own life, but I had also changed the way my family, and perhaps even Mark, would see me forever. Success doesn't always wear a tie, but it speaks for itself when you believe in it and yourself. And with that, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring life stories and updates.